Hey guys, welcome back to a new episode of DevJor. Today we're going to be continuing something that we had done a few weeks ago where we were creating this SammyJS application that you can see over here, and we built a very simplified API, which is essentially just a function page. So what I wanted to do is expand on this API a little bit more and actually make it more like an API, make it more secure, make it a little bit more accessible, and at the end of it we're going to be using Postman to kind of show you how some of these, the update and the create and delete functionality of the API would work. So I guess that we can start getting into it now. But before I do, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I try to do these videos once a week. So I would really appreciate it if you like the videos that you subscribe, and you can catch the next one when it comes out. So if you remember, we created these two functions. So we got list pages and single page. So list page controls the navigation at the top, and then the single page controls the information that's coming from this database that we have over here. Let's see, live pages. So all of this information here is contained in a database. Essentially, this is just using SammyJS to grab the information from it, and it's displaying in a way that we can make it accessible through a JSON call using JavaScript and jQuery. So what I want to do is kind of change this up a little bit. I'm going to go into the config in the database, and you see here we just have a very simplistic call for the database. I'm actually going to change this to a PDO call for the database. Instead of using MySQL, I'm going to use PDO just because it makes it a little bit easier to manipulate it in the future, and it also makes it a little bit easier when we go to do those update, select, insert statements, stuff like that. So first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and comment out this part, and I guess we can remove this since it is a continuous file, and we're going to use PDO, and we're going to create this class for the database so that we can call it in our other files and our controllers that we're going to have for this page. So let's go ahead and create a class called database, and then we're going to set up a few private variables for the PDO connection. So we're going to do private, that's not what I want to do, this is private host, and essentially we're just going to copy over some of the stuff that we have at the top. So it's going to be localhost, and then we're going to create another variable, and we're going to call this one database name underscore name equals, and then we're going to be doing live. Basically you can see I'm copying it from the top. I'm just rewriting it so that we actually have private variables to work with. We're going to do private username equals root, and then we're going to do private password, and because I'm using a dummy database, I just have the password set as nothing. And then we're also going to create a private port, and then we're going to set this to the 3308. And again, this is because we're using WAMP. You don't necessarily need to have a port on yours, but we have it on this just because we're using WAMP, and that's the only way we can connect to it locally, since we have another database set up that's kind of on the same it's on a different port, but it still uses localhost. And then we're just going to declare a private variable called connection or con, and then we're going to create a public function that we can use throughout the rest of the website. So public function, and we're just going to call it get connection, and then we're going to public function, and then we're going to do this con. Because we declared it as a public variable at the top, we're going to do this con equals nothing, just so it kind of clears out the database connections whenever it reconnects to it. So we're going to try to connect to it. If it doesn't connect, we're just going to pass a PDO exception error. So we're going to do this con equals new PDO, and you'll see that this is different than this. And there's different ways that it's set up, but PDO is a very good way to connect to a database. If you've never used it before, I highly suggest doing some research on it, because it's a lot more secure whenever you're going to pass things over, and it allows you to do things a different way. So this is just kind of showing you a different way to do it, but you'll see why I'm doing it when we actually get into writing the statements. So we're going to pass over the MySQL host, and then this is going to be equal to, and then we're going to pass over this host that we created at the top, and then I'm just going to add a new line to try to keep everything a little in order for you guys. You don't necessarily have to write it this way, but this is a little bit easier for me to show you what it is. Then we're going to be passing over this port, and then we're going to be passing over the database name, and this is going to be this database name, and then we're finally going to be just passing over this username, and then this password, and then we can end this statement. So now we need to finish out our try, so we're going to add a catch to it. So this is just catch any exception errors that come through. So PDO exception, and then we're just going to create a variable called exception, and then we're just going to echo out, I don't know, database could not be connected, and then we're just going to pass the database exception error. Exception get message, and that's it. And then we're going to return, because this is a function we're going to be using, we're going to return this connection. So this is what our new database file is going to look like, and I'll show you why we're doing it this way in a little bit. But there is also some new folders that I would like to create inside of our API file, because we're going to make it where it's not just pages, it's actually going to be kind of like routed, so that you can use pretty URLs rather than having to pass IDs and all this other kind of good stuff. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. We're going to call this one controllers. And this isn't going to be like a typical MVC, model view controller that you would normally see. This is going to be kind of our own little thing, but it should do the purpose that we need it to for the API. So we're going to create a file called pages.php, and then inside of this pages.php we're just going to create a class called pages, and we'll come back to this in just a second. Let me open up my PHP. So we'll come back to this in just a second. What I want you to really look at is we need to take the information out of here and add it to these version 1 of our API. So in order to do that, we need to create a v1 folder, because that's where our API files are going to be housed. So we're going to create a new folder inside of our API called v1, and then we're going to create a new folder called pages. No, we're going to create a, that is not what I wanted to do. I want to create a new file called pages. And then inside of this, this is where we're going to, no, that's not what I want to do either. V1, oh, never mind. I don't even know what I'm doing. I was supposed to create a pages folder, because we have a pages right here, which, looking at my test documentation that I did for this project, I saw this and I was like, wait a second, it needs to be created. Alright, so we're going to go in here and create a new folder called pages, and then inside of this folder called pages we're going to create 2 files that are going to match these functions on this page. So the first one is going to be called read.php, and then we're going to create another one called single.php, which is essentially, if you look at this, we got list pages and then single page. These functions are going to be moved over to these, so that we can call API/v1/pages/read, and it'll do essentially the same thing that's happening right here, without having to worry about all of this kind of functionality that we built into it for simplistic purposes prior to this. Okay, so let's go over to our controller that we created for the pages, and now we can start working on this a little bit. So let's say we want to create a function for the read and for the single. That way we can call that on these, let me get rid of this for now. So we can call the read and the single here. So we're just going to create some variables, and then we're going to create these functions. So first thing we want to do is pass the private connection that we had created prior to this, and we also want to make it a little bit easier when we're going to run our database calls. We're just going to create a private db_table, which is going to be our pages table. So that way when we're writing these calls, anything on this page is going to be essentially affecting the pages database, or the pages database table. And then if you wanted to create another controller that handles something else, you could change this to whatever database table that you're wanting to hit. And then next we're going to do the construct for this class, which is just going to basically create that connection for us. So we're going to do public function __ construct, and then we're going to pass the DB, and essentially we're just going to reset a variable on here that is going to be this con equals DB. So this is essentially going to take this database information and it's going to pass it to the functions of this class. If you've never done a construct, yeah, I spelled that wrong. If you've never done a construct, then you need to look at how to do PDO and stuff like that. This will allow you to create and set variables that are going to be used inside of this class, even if they're not part of this class. So just do a little bit of research on the construct, if I could spell it correctly. So __ construct, and then you can set whatever variables you want here that you can pull from other places, like an environment or anything like that. For this purpose, we're just going to be pulling over the database information, and I'll show you how we're going to use that in just a second. We need to create a public function, and we're going to call this one read so that it matches our page name. And then inside of this is where we're going to essentially recreate the SQL that we have here, but using PDO. So we no longer need the global MySQL. We don't need to create an array because we're going to be passing it as a JSON object in order for it to be able to be utilized in multiple languages on the front end a lot easier. So we're pretty much going to blow away this entire page, but for now I'm just going to rewrite some of it. So let's create a query, and this query is going to be equal to select slug and title, which if you look over here it's pretty much the same thing. So select slug and title from pages, order by order ID, but we also need to pass in the database table name. So instead of doing pages here, we are going to do this, and it's going to be this db_table, and that will allow us to do a select statement. And let me also make this a little bit prettier. So let's tab this over and then tab that over. Let me expand my window a little. It's wrapping weird, so let's just go back to this. Will be fine. When I tabbed over, it was dropping this down over here because of how I'm having to zoom in for y'all to be able to see it. So we're just going to do it this way for now. And then we should be able to tab there so you can see that this is the select statement, this is the order statement, just to make it a little bit cleaner whenever you're looking at it from a distance. And then we're going to do statement equals this con prepare, and then we're going to pass that query. And then we're going to do statement execute, and then finally we're going to return the statement. So as you can see, the difference between, hold on, what is this? Nope, don't need that. So what you can see, the difference between this and how this is being done, this is actually in returning the JSON encoded element. What we're actually going to do on the read.php, we're going to iterate through what we need to. So if you look here, we got the prepare statement, the execute statement, This one we got to get the results and all this kind of stuff, but we're actually going to be passing over the statement rather than passing over the JSON return. So let's also create another one. I guess we could copy this, and we're going to change this from read to single. And on this one, we're going to pass a slug, kind of the same way that we're doing it on this one, where we're passing that slug over. We're going to keep that, and we're going to pass it as well. So INGLE. Okay, so we're still gathering the title, but we don't need the slug anymore because we are not going to be displaying that on the page, but we do need to pass the content, and then we're going to be coming back from the same database table. We no longer need to worry about the order by because it's going to be the only one that is there. So we're going to do a where slug equals slug. So slug, and usually what we would do is something like slug equals question mark, but in this, since we're using PDO, we're going to be passing over these variable names, and I'll show you in just a second how to get that. Essentially it's the same thing, but it's a little bit easier to understand whenever you're going through it. Instead of having to worry about whether it's a string or an integer, you can just pass over what you're actually getting. So we're going to bind these parameters. So bind param, and then we are going to pass this slug variable that we are creating, and it's going to represent the slug that we are passing from the function itself. I believe that's all we need for these two. So now we need to go into our read page, and we're going to do this one kind of the same way we did the other one. We're just going to simplify it a little bit. So if we look at the top over here, we have all of this header information. We are going to copy it and we're going to paste it in here, but we're not going to use all of it. Essentially the only ones that we want to use is, because we're no longer posting to this function anymore, this function is all on its own. We're not having to worry about getting information, or we don't have to worry about updating or deleting or anything like that on this function. So the only thing we really need is the allow origin as well as the application JSON, just so it returns a JSON string or JSON object for us. And then we want to include the same way we did here, but I'm going to show you a different way to do it because we have it in a different folder than our database. We're going to, instead of doing just opening up straight to the database config, we're actually going to use the variable for PHP called server, S-E-R-V-E-R, and then we are going to pass the document root. And this is a pretty neat little variable that you can use where it actually grabs like the root of the folder and then it passes the rest of the information to it. So we have our database is inside of our API, so we're not going to do /config, we're going to do /API/config, just because we're coming from the document root. So if you look at our folder structure over here, the live folder is our document root, and then we have API, and then config, and then database.php. So we also need to take this, and we're going to include not the config, but we're going to do controllers, and then we are going to include pages.php, because that is what we called our controller. So it's now including this file and this file inside of it using the document root. Wish I could minimize this a little bit more so y'all can see it a little bit better without it wrapping. Let's see if I can. Nope. Do this. Nope. I don't know how to zoom out on this. I'm sure I'll figure it out as we go. But for right now, it's wrapping. Makes it a little bit harder to read, but it's okay. All right. So now that we're in here, we are going to create a connection to our database. So we're going to call it create a variable called database, and then it's going to be equal new database because it's now a class that we can use, and then we can pull information from that variable. So db equals database get connection, and we're going to leave that there. So if you're wondering why I called it DB, if we look inside of our pages controller, we're actually expecting the variable DB to come to this class. So I called it DB, and it's basically just grabbing that connection from the database. Okay, so next we have multiple items that are coming over here. So we're going to say items equals new pages, because now this the pages is actually a class that we can call. So we're going to pass our DB to that class so that it can use it throughout the rest of the functionality. And then we're going to do statement equals items read. So this is the function that we created in here for read, and then the items is the new pages. So items, it's going to look into that control or that class, and then it's going to grab that function and it's going to send over the statement that we are returning over here. So just to make that a little clear, so as you can see why I'm doing it that way. Also, whenever you're working with a JSON object, a good thing to return is an item count. And then you can do item count equals statement row count. And row count is a PDO functionality. If you were using MySQLi, you would use num_rows. Since we're using PDO, we're going to use row count. And essentially what this is going to do, in the next part, we're going to write some code that's going to say if there's no items, display an error in JSON. If there is items, populate a response with those items. So that's why the item count is important. So let's do if item count is greater than 0, and let's go ahead and we're going to be using an else, and let's go ahead and do an end if. Okay, so if it's greater than 0, we want to pass over a HTTP response code of 200, so that it is verified that it's a page that exists. And if it does not exist, we want to pass over an HTTP response of 404. And this is just something whenever you are using JSON coming from an API, you want to know if it's hitting something or if it's not hitting something. So if it's not finding something, we want to send it back like a 404 not found error, so that the program knows what to do with that code. If it's a 200 error, that means that it found something and it's sending back a response. So we need to create that response. So let's go ahead and create an array, and we're just going to call it the variable R. And then we're going to add a response to this R. So response equals array. So inside of our array, we're going to be adding a key called response, and then we're going to be passing another array to it. So we're going to have to change our JavaScript over here to look for this response rather than just pulling straight from the JSON array, because the way we want to do it with the objects, this makes it a lot easier for us to group everything together. Plus we're going to be passing over this item count, so that way that they don't just kind of mesh in together. We actually can understand the response versus the count that's going to be coming back as well. And then finally we're going to create a another key called count, and it's going to be equal to this item count at the top. So what we need to do is grab the information that's coming out of it. So we're going to do while row equals statement fetch, and then this is going to be a PDO method. So PDO fetch associative array, and let's go ahead and end the while so I can get rid of that error. And we're going to create a variable called E, which is going we're going to create a variable called E that is going to be equal to the row, which is basically everything that we have in this select statement. So the slug and the title for all rows is going to be put into this E value, and then we're going to push that array that we're grabbing to the response. So let's do array underscore push, and then we're just going to do response, and then we're just going to push the new array of the row into that response. And then we're going to echo out JSON encode, and we're just going to push out that array as a JSON object. Now for here, if it doesn't find anything, what we want to do, I don't know if we were doing it in the previous one. No, we were not. So basically, if it didn't find anything, there was no error messages. So we're going to add an error message here. So we're going to do echo JSON encode, and then we're just going to encode, and then we're just going to create an array that you could create it however you want it to. The way that I normally do it is I pass over a type, and that type is going to be danger, because I use Bootstrap on a lot of stuff that I do, so I can automatically know if I need to display an alert message that has the danger class or a success class. So in this case, it's going to be the danger class, and then we're going to pass over a title, and we're just going to call it failed. And then let's pass over the message that we can display inside of a message box on the front end, and we're just going to say no records found. Okay, so basically, if it has a count greater than 0, it's going to return a response code of 200, and then it's going to return all tables that it finds. And then finally, if it doesn't, it's going to have a response code of 404, and then it's going to return an error message. And I forgot to do that. No, okay. Why are you auto? Okay. Okay, so this is what we need for read, and we can test this out by going to our window over here, and I'm going to copy this, and we're going to do API slash what we called it, v1 slash pages slash read, and we can see that it is currently returning home, about, contact, and services, and there's 4 of them that are being returned. And I'll show you how to do this in Postman as well, but for right now we can actually see that response code is exactly the way that we want it to be. Okay, so now if we refresh this page, the whole thing is going to break because we completely changed our database connection. So we need to change our JavaScript to match what we've done. I believe app.js lists pages, so we're no longer pointing to this. We're going to be pointing to v1 slash pages slash read, and we don't need to send anything to it because it's gathering everything that it needs by itself. So I think we are passing the response, so we need to make sure that we pass the response here as well, so it's not trying to gather everything. But I think that would be all that we need to do here. So if we come back over here and refresh, let's do a hard refresh, we have our pages that are back, but if we click on them, it doesn't show anything because we need to modify how it's doing it over here by creating the single PHP. So let's go ahead and get into the single.php, and essentially we're just going to copy over everything inside of our read.php because they function very similar. Down here we need to change read to single. Let me make sure that I created that. Okay, I did. So single is being passed along there, and then we are going to pass over the post slug. So post slug, which is being gathered inside of this initialize.js. We don't need this type anymore because we're not we're accessing a completely different page. So we're still passing over the slug though. Let me go ahead and change this to v1 pages slash single so that it actually hits this page and we can test it whenever it goes live. Okay, so essentially we still need to pass over the response code, the count code. We're still doing this the same way. That's good. All this is good. And let's change this to new record found because it's only going to be returning one single record. So now if we go back over here and do a hard refresh, it did not do what I wanted to. So let's see what the console message is displaying here for us. Console. So it's saying that there's an unexpected token in the response for the JS. So let's see. Oh, that's because I didn't change it. We need to change the initialize.js. We are trying to get it from, let me see. Because we are passing it as an array, a response, or JSON object back to the JavaScript, we kind of sort of need to do this the same way we did this. So we're going to throw it into an each loop, and we're going to grab each element inside of that data response, and I'm just going to take this code and paste it in here in the place of the nav bar, because it is being returned as an array, because we set it as an array inside of the response in order to capture that count as well. So we do item.title and item.content. So it's essentially the same thing that we have on our the header navigation up here, but it's just passing over the h1 tag. So if we do a hard refresh now, it still isn't working. Why is it not working? So we got data response, single slug, post, item, h1, item title, item content. Let me see, is it still returning the error? So it's still returning an error there. So let me see inside of our single.php, UTF, access origin, database, get connection, items. Alright, so let's change this from items to item, because we're not gathering more than one. And then we're going to be passing the single with the slug value. Got our item count 0. We're going to be sending over the response and the item count, and then we're going to be pushing it here. And let's see if that works. Maybe it was just because the variables was items. I don't think that that's going to matter, but let's give it a shot. It did not. Okay, so let's look at our functions for this. So single slug, we are selecting it, title, content, and passing the table, we're slug equals slug. We got the connection prepared, we're binding the parameter, we're executing it, and then we're returning the statement. So slug is being passed, it's JSON, it's post, API v1 pages single, and that's what we called it, right? Live API v1 pages read, pages single. So read and single. Alright, so let me dig around a little bit. Okay, so I was playing around with it a little bit offline, and I got it to work, as you can see here. But the issue was that I was making the changes here. For some reason, it wasn't updating the JavaScript on these pages. I would do a hard refresh and all this kind of stuff, and it still wasn't updating it. So what I ended up doing was I copied the URL and went over here to /js/initialize.js, and then I just reloaded this page, and then it took my changes because it was still pointing to the wrong API. So whenever I refreshed it here, and I closed out and did a refresh, and it worked. So if you run into the issue, it's just because the JavaScript wasn't refreshing for some reason. Even with the hard refresh, it still wasn't doing it. Don't know why, but it's fixed now, so that's good. Okay, so I've been recording for a little over 30 minutes now. I think I'm going to break this up into 2 tutorials, just because I think the next part's going to probably another 30 minutes or so, and I don't want to have another hour-long video. So if you like the video, make sure you hit the thumbs up on it. Leave a comment, let me know what you thought of it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe to it. I have more content coming, especially the continuation of this video probably next week. But I think for now I'm going to go ahead and end it. I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you later.